Welcome to the Dead Man Walking Podcast. I am your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the soon-to-be released memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what actually happened to me. And that's how I got the name Repeatedly Dead Fred. I'm here today with David Gordon. He's going to be part of my author series. And David is not just an author. He's been a reporter. He's been a columnist. He's been an editor. And he's also an author. And am I correct? Soon to be author again?
Going to be author many times. Yes.
Yeah. So welcome, Dave. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Repeatedly Dead Fred.
I always forget that you have like a Mike Rowe kind of voice.
What do you mean?
You know, the deep voice like Mike Rowe has.
Oh, I heard micro when you it was kind of funny. Like you have a micro voice, like it's teeny, tiny, tiny, tiny. Oh, no. This is like the Dirty Jobs actor.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of him. He's a very charismatic, intelligent, and insightful fellow. And he does a lot of great work. Mike Rowe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. It's a compliment.
You're welcome. I wonder if he ever got teased about that. Hey, Micro. Hey, Micro.
I'm sure he has.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you want to take us around the block a little bit and tell us about how you got into the writing game? Like, were you from a young age, did you know you had a gift for writing? Or is this something that just sort of appeared to you later in life like it did for me?
Well, all of the above, actually. I really don't remember the precise time, and I can't pin it down into something that was actually a pivotal moment. But what I do remember is that when I was very young, for birthday gifts, my relatives keened in to this little hobby of mine and would give me notebook and pen packages. Because they knew this was something that I really enjoyed doing. So I would have a stack of pads and stack of pens and fill them up with, some people like to doodle. I like to fill them up with stories, and it started with science fiction stories because I love things like Star Wars and Star Trek and all that kind of stuff when I was young in the 70s and the 80s. And then it developed into role playing, actually. Again, narrative and storytelling.
This is family friendly. Be careful.
Well, I was talking about Dungeons and Dragons role playing.
Okay.
Role playing games, advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So this is all spun into my love of storytelling and narrative. And when I was in university, I always thought that I wanted to be a teacher, actually, because I really like the interactivity of sharing what I knew with other people, and I always aspired to inspire others with knowledge. And I applied for teachers college, teachers school, and turned down, and I was just shattered. And so it was but you know what? God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes what you think isn't a blessing, what you think might be a curse, is actually a blessing. Because then my backup was writing, and then I started writing for the student newspaper, liked it so much. This was the Excalibur at York University, and a Jewish quarterly I started writing for. And then somebody, I can't remember the turn of events. It might have been somebody at the Canadian Jewish News who I ran into. So why don't you submit something to us? And then my eyes opened, because I got paid to do what I love to do. And I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. And then I just rolled with it. I eventually worked in major newsrooms and freelanced for major publications, and loved the thrill of a new story each day and a new adventure each day, and meeting new people and talking to really cool people and going to interesting places. And so that is, in a nutshell, how it started from a very young age. to now.
So do you have any of those old notebooks and any of those old stories still around?
Yeah, I have. There was one I happen to know exactly where it is, but the other ones I really don't know where they are. And that one was given to me as a birthday gift, I think, when I was, this was birthday of 1980. So I had turned 8, and it was given to me by my Aunt Ginger, who was my grandmother's sister. And it was a hardcover. It's just amazing. This is actually, she invested in this. It's a hardcover blue notebook with thick pages. And I could still see my 8-year-old scribbles in there. So when I become a world famous and wealthy writer, maybe it'll go on the auction block and I'll make a few bucks.
Yeah. Speaking of bucks, do you remember what your first paycheck from the Canadian Jewish News was?
I'm sure with a little bit more thought, I could remember, but it eludes me right
just
now.
Made up a number.
So my first check was $75, and I remember the year. I think it was 1997. So it was 26 years. Wow, it's 2023 now. So there's 26 years that I've been making money from what I love to do. And I later in life discovered there are really only two kinds of jobs in the world. Really only two kinds of jobs in the world. The kind of job you look forward to going to, and the kind of job you look forward to leaving. And I've had both. And what a beautiful life a human being can have when they get up in the morning and they really look forward to the day. And I have that job.
That's a great outlook. And a job you can drink tea at all the time.
Well, yeah, exactly. I would be a wreck if I didn't have like an urn nearby that I can fill up a nice cup of tea.
So do you also believe there's only 2 types of liquid? There's only tea and bourbon?
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about bourbon after. So I want to talk a little bit about your first book, because you've delved into some biblical teachings to create your first book, which is How to Make a Kosher Apology.
Oh, wait. No, that wasn't my first one.
Okay, it's your first one to me. Okay, what's your first one to you?
Well, I wrote an actual Parsha book in 2009. It was called Sefer Bracha Tikva, and it was Parsha Bites, two pages of biblical, easy to read biblical commentary in layman's terms about the overarching lesson in each Parsha. And that came out in 2009. And later that year, I co-wrote, so it's not an authorship per se, but I co-wrote a school textbook for German students to learn about Canada.
Interesting. So for those in the audience who don't know what a Parsha is, it's the weekly chapter that is read in synagogues from what is often called the Old Testament or the Bible. And it's studied rigorously by people who observe the commandments in the Old Testament or the Torah. Bite-sized.
Right. And so the third book that came out after that, I was co-author. It was called Influence of, I'm sorry, I think it's called Insights and Influence, I think.
Okay.
And it was a thick book. And then these were profiles of successful Canadians over the age of 70, which I was the editor-in-chief of that book. I wrote about 10 of the 38 profiles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sold out. And I'm still trying to get copies to this day, which has proven to be very, very difficult. And then there was another book I'm drawing a blank about, but it'll come to me.
So how did you get
wait,
off?
now I remember. Forgive me. That was another book. In 2011, I wrote Inside the Mind, which was I interviewed big name CEOs, like really big name CEOs. I think about 36 of them, and it was a compilation of interviews. It's called Inside the Mind of publishers B2B News, and you could still get this on lulu.com. And that was a business book teaching people about the lessons that very successful CEOs have learned along the way.
How did you get access to all these people over 70? Like, they can barely hear their phones ring.
No, come on.
These CEOs. So how'd you get that's pretty phenomenal accomplishment on its own.
Well, when you're calling somebody up and you're saying you want to be in a book, they're very flattered, and it certainly helped that I had the backing of a couple of publishers. That it wasn't just kind of like I'm making something up. And so for the Canadians over 70 book, I interviewed the likes of Four Seasons founder Izzy Sharp, and I'm drawing a blank on a few others, but there were some other. Paul Godfrey, who's the CEO of Post Media. And as for the business book, it's interesting because I interviewed really successful individuals such as Joe Mimron, who was founder of Club Monaco, and he was on Dragon's Den, and rock star Gene Simmons.
Oh wow,
among many other very, very popular people.
And I think Joe is also Joe Fresh, isn't he?
Yes, today he is Joe Fresh. That's right.
For the Canadian people that shop in superstores and no frills and things of that nature, they'll know him very well.
So in Canada, you can go to the supermarket and buy your bananas, oranges, and blouses.
Okay. So of those stories, do you have one that stands out as a favorite to you that was or was particularly meaningful?
Off the top of my head, I'm going to say that Izzy Sharp was an inspiring story. Okay. So he started the first Four Seasons. It was sort of like a seedy motel downtown Toronto in the early 60s. It was nothing like the top tier elite 5-star hotel that we know today. And the crazy thing about it was that he had no hotelier experience other than staying in them. He'd never built one before. He'd never financed one before. He didn't know anything about the internal workings of anything. He just said, I want to build a hotel, and I'm just going to do it. And he plugged away, faced a number of financial hurdles, faced a lot of naysayers, but it's the story of you just put your mind to something and you put aside whatever self-censorship. Maybe it might be foolish or naive to do so, but there's something to be said about persistence and determination and being willing to take risks. And that's what he did. And now his hotel is synonymous with world top quality hotels.
That almost sounds like a good creed for or credo, whichever word's appropriate, for writers. Get rid of the naysaying, the people that say you can't do it, you're wasting your time, you'll never amount to anything, and just keep writing that 15 minutes a day or 100 words a day or whatever, system you set up for yourself. Do you have a system that you've set up for when you write?
Yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a set routine, or shall I say something that I would do to get myself into the creative juices. I know that a lot of people have a number of rituals. Athletes have rituals, some weird things that they do, like a pitcher might rub his hands before the game for absolutely no other reason than just it feels good, or it's something that psychs him up.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say that I have any particular routine or ritual, but something that that soothes me is my tea. I'll sit down with a nice cup of tea, and somehow or another, I get into that zone. And when I see it's empty, like it is now, that is timing for me to take a stretch break, go upstairs, go to the urn, fill it up, come back down, and somehow or another I feel. And it's interesting that you mentioned it because it didn't occur to me now.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of clears my head. A lot of people just hunch over and work and work and work and work and work. Mm-hmm. And that can they can really overload. It can blow circuits, in here.
Mm-hmm.
So come to think of it, every time I get up and get a new glass of tea, I'm actually taking a breath and stretching my back, stretching my legs, and moving around and getting some air and getting some space and kind of recharging, and then coming back to my desk with a fresh tea and ready to go again.
Mm-hmm. I myself I work in bursts, I guess, so much like you. And then, have to take a break and get back in touch with the world and stuff like that. Because writing can be very isolating.
Oh, that's very true. You have to love kind of being married to the screen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we talk about the How to Apologize book, because that's also fits in with one of the themes I explore in the podcast is health and mental health. And it may sound like a silly topic for an entire book, but if people don't apologize and they have lots of things to apologize for, it can build up a toxicity in you. And having a set way to go about apologizing in a sincere manner that people are more likely to accept can be a real game changer for some people. So.
Yeah, the science has shown that human apology is the balm that connects people much greater after a mistake or wrong. It is the thing that helps mend fences and smooths things over. And unfortunately, most people really don't get the, shall I say, the mechanics of an apology right. Mm-hmm. They might not have learned how to do it. It is a muscle. It is also an ego muscle. You have to learn how to humble yourself a little bit, and suffice it to say, people can't go through life thinking, "How can I be right? How can I be wrong when I'm always right?" Mm-hmm. I after a lot of reading on the topic, and research on the topic, from the sage wisdom to the Jewish wisdom to the modern science of it, there are very basic elements of what I refer to as a kosher apology. There was a a well-respected Jewish thinker by the name of Maimonides, also called Rambam, who lived 800 years ago, who wrote a small volume, a little compendium, maybe 30 pages or so, and it's called Hilchot Teshuvah, which in English means the way of repentance. And I borrowed some of that and turned it into an English acronym, which I call the ESP rule. And I've simplified this just to be able to make it so simple that it's bulletproof. And the ESP rule is you have to apologize expediently, right? You can't let the wounds fester. You can, as I like to say, fine, sweep the problems under the carpet, but then you're going to end up tripping over it. Solve the problem right away. Second is the S. It's specificity. What did you do wrong? You can't say, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry if there was any misunderstanding. I'm sorry if I did anything wrong or if I may have hurt you. Confession is the biggest part of an apology. And we learned that from Christian confessional booths. You can't walk into a confessional booth and say, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And he says, okay, so what'd you do? Yeah, sorry for whatever it is I did. No. Joseph Telushkin, in a book called the Jewish Book of Ethics, he likens it to, if you don't confess in an apology, it's akin to a trial that doesn't mention the crimes. And the P part of the ESP rule is promise through words and actions not to do it again. Because when you've hurt somebody, you've done it wrong, even if by mistake, a bit of trust has been broken. And I liken trust to the spine of a relationship. If a piece of the spine is broken, you can't really walk properly. If a piece of the relationship is broken, the relationship doesn't really function the way it should. The relationship doesn't walk properly. And in order to repair that, you need to show that you're willing to regain trust. And it doesn't always mean that you have to do something. It can mean, I'm sorry, I insulted you. I'll be more careful next time not to say that same thing to you again because I didn't know it insulted you. But if it's an action, you can't talk your way out of an action. You have to make sure that there's an action to offset the action. In other words, if I borrowed your car and I crashed it into a pole, I have to say, Fred, I'm really sorry about that. That's on me. I'm responsible for all the repairs. So the ESP rule is the very simple way to remember what a kosher apology is, and that there are a few other details that I can get into, but for simplicity purposes, this is what I discovered that has been backed up by thousands and thousands of years of anecdotal and provable validity.
So did you have a big apology that you had to do and were procrastinating on that put you on the path to write this book, to find out how do I make the perfect apology and get myself out of this mess?
Yeah, no. So there were a couple of things that were really turning points. You know, the more that the internet began to develop in the 90s, mostly late 90s, early 2000s, and I'm in the journalism industry, I noticed pretty much every single day there's some sort of politician or celebrity or public figure is issuing some sort of apology. And the headlines would often say, so-and-so apologizes for blah. And I'd read this stuff and I'd say to myself, but that's not even an apology. You said in the headline, or even the public figure would say, I apologize for my misdeeds. And I'd be looking at that going, yeah, so what'd you do, pal? And then the reporter has to explain what he did, but the public figure never actually said. And this bothered me because I'd see these reports, and the more the internet became readily available to, look, you and I are at a certain age where we remember a time where the internet was very, very young, and the gush of information started in the late 90s, and that was when I was midway through my career working in newsrooms. And I looked at this, I shook my head, and I bristled. These people obviously don't know what, and even I really didn't know, but something didn't smell right. All these were contrived apologies. So then I harkened back to when I was bar mitzvah. And I always remember Rabbi Pritzker said to me on the bima, he said, today you become a man. And you know what that means? And I'm like, no. And he says, it means that from this point on, you are responsible for your actions and you have to take accountability for your actions. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's kind of nice, like whatever. But years later, I thought, no, that actually means something. What does it mean to hold yourself responsible and take accountability for your actions? And I likened the idea of that when you come of age and you have that rite of passage, that you become, that it is a sign, it follows that it is a sign of maturity to take responsibility for your actions. And then I drew the conclusion that some people just don't have that maturity to hold themselves accountable. And I combined these two, and it just really troubled. And then, I started to think throughout life, there were times where I fudged it, and people I knew fudged it. Some people really, really fudged it. And I didn't understand, how is it that you could just screw this up? Why couldn't you just say, Dave, I'm really sorry that I don't know, I stepped on your foot or something, whatever it is. And so I started to develop this interest in learning more and more about what makes an apology. And because I'm a religious Jew, I felt as if that there would be inevitably answers to what Judaism calls teshuvah. It's a very popular concept. Teshuvah is repentance. In fact, between Rosh Hashanah, the new year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, it's called Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of repentance, where we're supposed to do some self-reflection and go to our fellow that we've wronged over the course of the year and say we're sorry. But if we don't know how to do that, then we're going to screw it up.
And they also have to forgive you.
No, they don't.
Okay. We have different sources on this. So
nobody has to do anything. You're not forced to do anything. There's no commandment, thou shalt forgive. I'll give you an example. The Talmud has a story where a fellow goes up to another guy and he says, I'm really sorry for hurting you the other day. And the hurt party says, don't forgive you. And then transgressor comes back another time. He says, I'm really sorry for hurting you. And the hurt party says, I don't forgive you. And then the transgressor comes back a third time. And what the commentators say is that if on the third time the hurt party says, I don't forgive you, God will forgive, and that the sin therefore goes on the head of the hurt party rather than the transgressor. And what does that do? The point of it isn't to embarrass us. The point of it isn't to have us grovel or keep going back to somebody. The point is to say that sometimes the hurt party needs time. Sometimes the hurt party needs a little bit more than just, oops, I'm sorry. And sometimes they were so deeply hurt that it's going to take a couple times for you to come back to them and say, I'm coming back to you a second time, and I'm really sorry. Will you forgive me? So there are a lot of examples. I mean, that's just one of many. There are a lot of examples in Jewish teaching that say that you do not necessarily have to instantly forgive. You can, but you don't have to.
Okay. Well, you pay the consequences if you don't.
What do you mean?
Well, then the sin becomes yours if you don't forgive the person.
The Talmud says that if the person had asked a third time and you refused forgiveness, you're considered hard-hearted. So if you follow my formula for Kosher Apology, you are less likely to hear a no.
Okay. So I'm finding this fascinating. So, because there's a lot packed into a very short conversation that we're having, and we haven't yet talked about your upcoming book. So, in 3 minutes or less, do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because it's also in the health and wellness space.
Yeah, it's called the Jewish Path to Healthy Living. And what I have done is I've looked at Jewish ritual and Jewish law to find out what science and modern medicine has to say about it. And again, as a journalist, I have discovered that news items over the course of time have been reported about these items, such as keeping the Sabbath, and how modern medicine now considers it a digital detox. And there have been a lot of studies and a lot of research done about these things. So I started to collect them into a book and started making my own discoveries about other science and medicine reports that haven't made it to the news that validate how very, very many Jewish rituals are good for health and wellness and psychology. So just one example is a brief outline of the rules of Shabbat, or the Sabbath, on Saturdays for Jews. No car, no phone, no email, no lights, no television. And studies show that by doing so, it is a recharge day for Sabbath observant people. Taking one day off from work per week offers the body a healthful rest, as well as a mental and physical refresher. So in the December 2013 study from the University College of London said that there are huge mental health benefits of Sabbath observance. Columbia University had a 16-year study saying that there are markedly less examples of depression for people who take a digital detox or a day off of work and unplug. And a similar study from the University of Virginia National Marriage Project actually found that setting aside time to have dinner together, even just once a week for a family, strengthens the bonds of the family. And lastly, even Harvard Business School released a study that said resting from work once a week had extremely good health, mental and physical benefits. So there you have it, a 3,500-year-old ritual that Jews have been observing throughout history is now shown to have health benefits, to which I say science has finally caught up to God. God must have had a very good, I'm sure he had very other reasons too, but I don't doubt that one of them is give your body and mind a rest.
For sure. And even 3,500 years ago, when our worlds weren't as complex as they are now, keeping the Sabbath and having that detox day is probably even more important. And we see parallels, in other cultures around the world. Yoga and meditation is essentially a detox period, that sort of thing. And fasting days are generally across the major religions. And some rabbis that I can't remember the names, but they're more almost into the intermittent fasting world, as opposed to, how many fasting days did we figure out we had? 18?
18. In Jewish life, there are 18 fast days. A lot of people think that it's just relegated to, if you're Jewish, you might find a lot of these familiar. If you're not Jewish, you might not, but I'll name the Yom Kippur, the fast of Esther, fast of the firstborn, the 9th of Av, fast of Gedaliah, 10th of Tevet, 17th of Tammuz. But also there's something called the Little Yom Kippur, or small Yom Kippur, to be held on